My name is Preston Manning. I'm been a member of Parliament for 9 years and was a founder of the Reform Party of Canada and the Canadian Alliance. I'm a practicing Christian, and my background is of the Evangelical persuasion. My own interest, like in connecting faith and politics, came back to some very basic things. Like I think faith is a legitimate perspective that's out there among the public. If you take public opinion surveys, the number of people that profess to believe in God, that profess to pray at least once a week, and many of them once a day, that profess to read religious or faith-based literature. The numbers are high, 50, 60, 70%. This is in Canada. And even though we have a multi-faith society, the proportion that is basic Christianity is very high, far higher than any of the other faiths. And so that's a fact of our democratic society, and yet it's not reflected. Like if you took that same poll among the press gallery in Ottawa, or even among the members of Parliament, you would not find the faith perspective represented to anywhere near the same degree. And one of the tasks I saw as a Christian in politics is to somehow make it more acceptable, at least, to acknowledge the spiritual heritage of our country and the spirituality of a large number of our people. And you don't have to do that in a way that imposes it on people. You're not saying, you know, respect the spiritual traditions so that it can be jammed on those that don't accept it. But you're saying that is a fact, and we ought it ought not to be an embarrassment to the House of Commons if some member of Parliament talks about their personal faith, because 60, 70% of our people are perfectly capable of doing that. Why can't we? The question arises, under those circumstances, does one feel a constraint, a necessity of holding back, expressing your faith in the political arena? And I would say, certainly, I felt a necessity to be cautious, because if you expressed your faith in a way that just allowed it to be ridiculed or attacked by others, you could end up doing the faith more harm than good. And I think the secularity of the Parliament, the Supreme Court, the mass media make it hard to express your faith, and you have to be careful and cautious in how you do it, or it'll be misconstrued and misunderstood. Sometimes, like on issues like abortion or euthanasia, these issues that are dealing with, you know, life and death type issues, I would, if people would ask me at public meetings what my position was, I would tell them that I was on the pro-life end of the spectrum, and that this was our outworking of my own understanding of respect for life that came from my Christian faith. But if I just said that very briefly, it would be very easy for a reporter to pick that up and just report a part of it, not the context in which I expressed it, not the broader explanation I gave it. And so that makes any politician cautious. If you can't give your whole explanation, and all you're going to get is the 10-second clip, and it'll be the 10 seconds that are least advantageous to you, should you say it at all. And I used to wrestle with that. I used to basically say what my position was anyway, but then you'd end up getting letters that misunderstood what you were talking about. It seems like in Canada, people, if you express your faith, people are afraid that you're going to impose it on them. And I think this has been partly propagated by the people that do oppose faith. They say, well, you better not listen to that because what that person really wants to do is impose their faith. And that's such a contradiction as to what a genuine Christian faith is about. Like if you read the New Testament, Jesus Christ himself was accused of everything under the sun by his opponents. Everything that they could possibly have used to discredit him, they did. But the one criticism you do not find of him is that you better be afraid of him because he's going to ram his Sermon on the Mount or whatever down your throat. Like that accusation is never recorded in the Scriptures. And I think the reason it isn't is because that was simply not believable about him. The way I feel you exercise leadership in these situations where you have a moral position based on your faith and others disagree with it is you endeavor to present your position and try to convince the rest that that's the position they ought to take. And if you imply that if you say that at the end of the day, if you want to do something different, I'm prepared to represent your view. I won't be able to do it very effectively because you know I don't believe in it. But I'll stand up and vote for it if there's a genuine consensus among you. I found that then gave you a credibility with people who would listen to you. But if you went to them and said, look, I've got it all figured out, here's where I'm coming from, I'm going to do this regardless of what you think, then you lose your opportunity to persuade. And I think Christians that end up taking a position that we're going to ram this down their throats, whether they like it or not, are not behaving in a biblical or godly manner. That you respect people's freedom, but you do everything you can to persuade them to make the choice that you feel is most conducive to life. Like I believe that, a man was brought into being by God, that God himself wants a relationship with us. It's not a matter of us just seeking after him, that he actively seeks a relationship with man, and that Jesus Christ was sent to make possible that relationship, and that you are ultimately forced to make a decision, like, is he who he said he was, or isn't he? Like, you got to decide, and I don't think you should take a lifetime to decide. I think you got to decide as early as possible because it's going to affect the rest of your life. And I made just a personal decision to believe, to take Christ at his word, that he was who he said he was the Son of God, that he came to take away the things that separate us from God and separate us from other people. And those would probably be the cornerstones of my own faith. The earliest influences would be the influence of my parents, the influence of the Christian scriptures themselves. I got into the Christian scriptures quite early. The fact that I grew up in the West, I think, influenced my faith in certain ways, the faith perspectives of the community, and my wife, Sandra. Those would probably be 4 major influences. My father was raised on a homestead in Saskatchewan, and he ended up in the legislature. He went to be a minister of the gospel, ended up being a minister of the crowd in the provincial government in 1935. But because his own faith commitment had come through listening to the radio, he always had a soft spot for using the radio to communicate the Christian gospel, actually. And my mother directed the music side of it. It was a sermon and a Christian music selection. And so that was a very big part of our home. On Sundays, Father always preached on the radio, and Mother directed this religious music program. And that was very much part of my whole upbringing. I was raised on a farm, and a farm's a great place for young people to grow up on. And I think country people, partly because they're living with the land and the forces beyond their control, and that faith can take a deeper root in the rural communities. Because I'm an urban person now myself, but I do think there's in the rural communities, and this is a strength of rural communities, that faith seems to be more nurtured there than it does in the concrete and the busyness of the city. And it was just a great experience for me growing up. I became conscious in my teens, as many people do, of wondering whether now is my faith commitment simply something I've been culturalized into by my family and church and community, or is it my own? And in my teens, I decided to make my faith commitment my own. I say, well, even if that was a problem, well, the thing to do is decide: do you believe this because you believe it, or do you believe it because your parents have been impressing it upon you? And I made my own personal faith commitment in my teens. And the struggle for me has been more on the practicing of the Christian faith. So you believe that, say, the Christian faith from an evangelical perspective, that relationships are the most important thing in life, that you can enter into a relationship with God through faith in the life and teachings and death and resurrection of Christ, that commitment ought to somehow affect your relationships with other people and what you're doing in a very positive way. Like, that's the doctrine, that's the creed, but how does that work out in practice? How does that work out in business? How does it work out in politics? How does it work out in science? My struggles have been more in that area, not doubting the validity of the faith, but trying to figure out, okay, how does this really affect how you act in these various other spheres of life? I think the way to approach the multi-faith dimension of Canada's society is not to just take this vague masquerading of tolerance, because I really think it's insulting to people of faith to just say, well, it doesn't matter, there's no real objective truth here, so just believe what you want to believe in. But rather that you should challenge each of the faith communities to say what it is they think fundamental truth is. And our discussion should be on, we can't all be right. Let's see how it works out in practice. As Christ said, by your fruits you'll know them. He said that about prophets. Ultimately, your beliefs are going to either produce a moral person and moral relationships, or they're not. That we'd be better to be honest with each other on our differences and to let the different faith perspectives compete, recognizing they can't all be right, or maybe all of them have defects, rather than just trying to be so tolerant that we deny the reality of any spiritual truth. One of the positives that even a multi-faith perspective brings is that there is certain agreement. People always stress the differences between these faiths. In fact, I was in a debate a few months ago on should faith be allowed to have anything to say on this issue of human reproductive technology. And a gentleman representing the Humanist Society said no, they shouldn't be allowed into the regulatory agreement because they can't agree. They'll just come in there and present diverse views. Well, I said, my friend, when the parliamentary committee was looking at this bill, we had scientists who came and took different perspectives, who didn't agree. Are you saying that the lack of agreement means we should throw the scientists out because they're not in 100% agreement either? I said we had professional ethicists who came, who took opposite positions on some of the complex issues. And are we saying that we shouldn't let the ethicists in because they don't agree? Like, how come the disagreement about people of faith precludes their contribution to the discussion, but not the disagreement among science and ethics? So I guess what I'm saying is that one should not be as fearful of the disagreements among the different faith groups. And coming back to the original point, there is a certain agreement among them. And one of the agreements is that there is a dimension to life that's spiritual, that's not material, and and that spiritual dimension should be recognized. Some people say that you should just park your faith at the door and make your decisions all on the basis of secular values, but I say no, that's a mistake. First of all, there's a large proportion of the Canadian community does have a faith perspective. Are we saying that cannot be represented in the Parliament of Canada? Are we going to exclude? Are we going to exclude our spiritual tradition? I mean, you won't find a cultural anthropologist in the world that'll tell you can divorce religion from culture. But are we going to say when we talk about culture in Canada, we're going to cut out that? Like it's not wise to not bring to bear on the decision perspectives that are part of your people's heritage and are an active part of their current community. Secondly, I believe that faith perspective has something to contribute positively to these decisions that we're making. Right now, as you know, since September 11th, political leaders all over the West, including all over the Western world, including our own Prime Minister, pronounced what happened on September 11th as evil. They used the word, this was evil, and misguided faith, fanatical Islamic fundamentalism, misguided faith. As soon as you label any public or private act as evil, you've got to say by what standard do you say that is evil or something else is good. And then you've got to take it down the road. If you start saying, well, what you did was evil or what you did was good, you're going to say, okay, by what standard did you arrive at that? I'm going to apply that standard to you. You can't apply standards just to the other guy. It gets applied back to you. And we're forced then in the Parliament, in this case with respect to foreign policy and defense policy, to say, are there certain moral standards here? There's certain things are evil and certain things are good, and by what standard are we going to say that? And I think those are questions that people of faith have wrestled with for 5,000 years. And are we going to say, well, that perspective can't even be permitted into the debate? And the interesting thing I see, like, we've been going through this period in Canada and the Western world where this moral relativism has been the prevailing ethic, that it's just, well, just you believe what you believe and I'll believe what I believe on right or wrong, or you think that's right but I think it's wrong, well, that's fine. But we're, in some of these areas we're finding that that's no longer adequate. You can't say, well, those terrorists believe that blowing up buildings is right, but we believe it's wrong, so let's just let it be. People won't let it be. They're saying there's got to be a standard here that we adhere to. And as soon as you start saying that, then what you have to start looking for is a standard outside yourself. Like, you won't accept my moral standard and I won't accept yours, so if we just go back and forth, there's no resolution. But isn't the conclusion we come to, we need some kind of moral standard and guidance that's outside both you and me. And as soon as you say that, where are we going to find that? I think every person of faith and every Christian goes through times when they are not conscious of God's even presence, let alone direction. And those are difficult times. You sort of have a couple of choices, I guess. One is you can say, well, he isn't here. You know, this has all been a delusion, so let's abandon it. Or you can believe that, yes, God is there, and yes, God still cares, and yes, God is directing, but he's just simply not revealing himself at this point in time. So I'll keep believing in spite of the circumstances. When I lost the leadership of the Canadian Alliance, like, I'd pushed this thing from the start. The Reform Party had become the official opposition, but I felt it had to get bigger and broader if it was ever going to be a governing party. We pushed this concept to the point of the creation of the Canadian Alliance, and it got the point. It was the biggest political party in the country. It had 270,000 members. It had the potential for raising $25 million for the 2000 election campaign, and the potential to to win 100 seats in that election if it conducted itself wisely. And when I lost the opportunity to carry it that one more step, like I couldn't help but feel that either I'd made some mistakes along the way, or that I felt perhaps a crisis of faith at that point in time. But my response to that is the same as it has been in other occasions. You just have to decide in those occasions. Is God working something out that you don't see, and you choose to continue to believe in His providence and care, or do you abandon that faith? And I just chose to continue to believe in His providence and care. People have asked, do you, as a professing Christian, when you went into politics, did you feel called by God? And I'd have to say, not in any specific sense, but I'd committed my life to God, asked God to direct my life long before I got into politics. Circumstances developed in which it seemed to be the right thing to do, and I guess in some broad sense you could say that that was a sense of direction. But I never got a tablet of stone that dropped from heaven saying go into politics. And the more I've been in politics, or I guess the older I get, I think God is more interested in what you are becoming and being then yes, I think He does call certain people very specifically to certain missions, and usually those people know that they've been called and can tell you about it. But I think God is calling us more to be a certain kind of person, and a person that in the end somehow reflects what Christ was like. And I feel more conscious of that calling, being called to be a certain person, whether I'm in politics or business or whatever I'm in, than to a particular vocation or mission. Now, that's just my own experience. Other people have a different experience, but that's been mine. With respect to the future, I'm not in the active political arena now. I'm doing some public policy work with a couple of think tanks, with the Fraser Institute, the Canada West Foundation. A couple of universities have given me an opportunity to work on public policy and to interact with students at the University of Calgary and the University of Toronto. And I hope to, I've got a book coming out in which I reflect on both my political experience and my experience as a Christian in politics. And I hope to be able to give some guidance to Christian people that will listen about what is a wise way to conduct, how can people of faith conduct themselves with wisdom in the political arena. I think we're capable of acting not wisely, and I've made lots of mistakes myself that I think I can share with people. So I hope to not just tell Christians there should be more, we better have better guidelines for our political participation, but maybe to share that with people in the years ahead.